There have been a lot of posts in the Google Plus community lately where people have been showing how they're using standards-based or specifications grading in their courses. I wanted to take a moment and show not exactly how I implement SBSG in my courses, but a little bit about how I implement a grading system for SBSG using our campus's learning management system, which is Blackboard Learn. I also have some limited experience teaching a specs grading class using Moodle as well, and maybe in a separate video I'll show how I did that, but I wanted to start with the system that I use most often. This course is from the winter 2017 semester at our university, and it's the third time that I've taught this particular course. I've been teaching it with specs grading all along and making changes as I go. I want to start by going into the full grade center, which is what Blackboard calls the view where you get to see all your students and all the columns that you have in your grade center. I want to note that I'm almost never in this view because it's just way too much information and is not that useful for me. This wasn't a large class that only had roughly 20 students, but with all the assignments and all the different things I was checking, this just scrolls horizontally for what seems like forever. So I'll show you a couple of the ways in which not only did I manage to keep things a little better organized, but then also how I created a set of smart views, as Blackboard calls them, to make it easier to see the information that I wanted to. So the first thing I want to look at are what Blackboard calls grading schemas. These are the ways in which you can set up custom labels for different scores. There are a few here that Blackboard gives us by default, like letter and, I forget which other of these, complete, incomplete. But I added a few to help out with specs grading. So a lot of the Google community users are using some version of the EMRN rubric. I have a version here. When you create a grading schema in Blackboard, it requires you to identify percentage ranges and also the labels for what things will be in this system. For me, the most important thing are the letters. The percentages aren't necessarily quite as important exactly what these are. I defined E as being a fairly high range, M at that 80% threshold that is often used in specs grading, and then 60 and under. These are scores that I usually enter by hand, so more important in some ways is over here on the right, this mapping of what those letters translate to when I enter the letters manually. And I set E to be 100, and this is also a little bit arbitrary as well. But it's also not overall that important because these are never really used in any calculated grades in Blackboard, so the percentages or point values are kind of fungible. So that's EMRN. I also use a past progressing no pass scale. Here, even though I mark progressing as a 50 right in the middle, it's actually a very large category. Generally, I find that when using a 3-level scale like this, I'll enter a pass, and it really is intended to be the top of the range. A no pass is really a 0, meaning that they didn't do it, which in this case, I just let progressing be everything in between. I do have a couple of assignments that are quizzes that get auto-graded, and there are ones where students have to get a perfect score. For example, my syllabus quiz is like this, in which case I do have a custom scale that I use with that quiz. You'll notice that I tried to make a pass equal just 100, and in Blackboard you can't use 100 and 100 in the two boxes for the scale, so very close, and then 100 and everything under that is a no pass, which means that when that quiz gets automatically graded, it's either going to be a 100% and therefore a pass, or it's going to be a no pass. The only other one that I want to highlight here is this PNP content check. So each of the modules in my course has a quiz at the end designed to sort of just do simple comprehension checking. It's generally multiple choice or similar auto-graded items, and they're set where students get a pass if they receive an 80%. So that's also just a 2-level schema, and quite simply is just set out so that a pass is defined as 80 to 100 and a no pass is everything in below. Another small thing that not a lot of people use in Blackboard is its ability to color code grades. Let me just show you exactly what I do here. So first of all, if you don't have them turned on, you'll need to turn on this check mark. And then I've really only got 2 colors set up here. I want to very easily be able to see when people have no passes or those kind of they're not failing, but those kinds of grades where I do need to pay attention to them, and also scores which are usually kind of in that progressing, I need to work on it range. So I've set up 2 color coding, red background with white text. And you'll notice here it's 0 to 0.5. I did that kind of like with the perfect pass schema, just because I really want to capture things that are 0, and I can't put 0 in both of those. Above 0.5 and really close, and that's intended to be a 0. And this one captures grades that are sort of right in between. I don't use this one as much, and actually I probably could get rid of it, but you'll see in some of the views where this is actually a very useful thing to turn on for your grading. So most people know that in Blackboard you can assign categories to assessment items, that you can actually make your own custom categories. I've done that quite liberally here, and you'll notice here to the right all those different assignments that match up with the categories that I've made. Now I use some of the default ones like assignment, but I have some assignment types that are custom for my course: case briefs, case law certification test, content check. Those are those module quizzes that I was talking about. And module score is then just the score that students receive for that module as a whole, which is either a pass or a no pass, which I enter manually based upon what they've done in the module. So categories are one part of the equation of being able to use Blackboard's Grade Center for specs or standards-based grading. The other one, something which at our university I don't think I've heard anyone ever talk about, is the idea of grading periods. My guess is that Blackboard designed this for use, for example, in American K-12 schools where there might be 1, 2, 3, 4 periods throughout the year where separate grades are reported. I suppose you could also use this with pre-midterm and then after midterm. But what I've done here is I've defined a number of custom grading periods related to sort of the units, the blocks, the modules in my course. These are pretty much all modules, so the different case law modules, a couple of beginning modules, and ones for a few other things that I wanted to keep together. It doesn't really take much to create a grading period in Blackboard. Basically, you just need to give it a name, and it's just another way to label things. So by using both categories as well as grading periods, you can actually put an assignment in sort of 2 different boxes at once, which is kind of handy. If I go out and go to the column organization view, which is really in some ways the only time in Blackboard you get to see all of your columns on one screen, what you'll notice is that it breaks things down into those grading modules, and you can see how I have used this then. Blackboard limits you in terms of how many characters you can see in the header of a column in the Grade Center, which is why these have kind of cryptic names. What I usually try to do is be as descriptive within a limited amount of space. So when you see an asterisk, that's actually then the module score for that module, either a pass or a no pass, and you can see it's in that module score category. They have content, they have a syllabus quiz, they have a couple other assignments. As I scroll through, you can see that same kind of process happens. I use a lot of similar kinds of assignments, so those abbreviations in most instances relate to that. So CC is a content check. So those are the tools that actually help make it possible to sort of slice and dice things in the way that you need. What really makes using the Grade Center vaguely possible is the idea of smart views, though. And this is another feature that not a lot of people who use Blackboard necessarily know about. Smart views allow you to take your entire Grade Center, all the rows and columns, and chop them up into specific subviews. So I've created a lot of different smart views. This is actually the second of 2 pages. Apparently I have 37 total, a couple of which were already in the system. Blackboard allows you to turn some of these into favorites. That's what the green star here is. And that means that they show up over here, taking out one level of clicks that you need to get to things. So some of these smart views relate to particular modules. Let me go back, and I think most of them are on the first page here. So Case Law Module 1, if I go in and edit it, Blackboard gives you a number of different ways to define them. In this case, what I want is all the columns in the Grade Center related to a particular grading period. The grading period I've defined for Case Law Module 1. The user view is one way to do that. I can choose all users instead of just some students. Then from this filter, I can choose grading periods. And that allows me to choose Case Law 1 as what I see. And then when I go and take a look at it, I just see those columns. Last access is a column that shows when the student was last in Blackboard. I like to have that in all my Grade Center views just because it is a little sort of indication of whether they're on top of things or not. And here you'll see those red highlighting that we talked about earlier when students receive a no pass. It's just a quick way to see when there's a problem. So that's a smart view related to a grading period. I also have ones that sort of pull together and summarize some information. So for example, if I go over to the second page, we'll see module scores. Module scores is set up to show all the different columns that are the actual scores students have received. I think I could actually have defined this a couple of different ways, but in this case, category and status, I've chosen the category module score and for all students. And what that then does is it pulls in just those columns overall, which is a quick way to see how they've done across the different units in the course. Really, smart views are the secret that makes it all work and makes it actually usable. So with this particular setup, I do a decent job, in my opinion, of keeping track of specs grading information here in Blackboard. The one thing that I really don't like is that there's no good way for students to actually get a useful view of information. If I go into the student view here, I don't think there's any way around the fact that in Blackboard the students will only ever see this long unbroken list of what they have submitted and what they have to do. For me, the big problem is that it doesn't show any of the relationship between the assignments that they're working on. So while I do keep track of scores in Blackboard, I also have another system that I use, and I'll talk about that in another video, something that helps me as well see the relationship between the work that they're doing and where they need to be to get a certain grade. Hope this helps you out, and I look forward to any comments or questions you might have. Thanks.